What's going on, everybody? A second test of a live stream here, and for those of you that are tuning in live, hopefully the connection is a little bit better. I downscaled my video down to 720 for the live stream, and I'm going to be posting a recording of this, so for you, if you are having trouble viewing the live stream, you might check out the recording, which will be posted within the next 24 hours after this. For those of you tuning in live, thanks for joining me. I'm going to be doing an edit of a photo that was sent to me. I reached out to some followers of mine on Instagram and asked them to send me some RAWs, and I got a few submissions, and so I'm going to take a look at one of those submissions tonight, and let's take a quick peek at that submission now. This is a submission from Travels for Pictures. You can see his Instagram up there. I've actually placed it into the video description, so you can click a link there to check out his Instagram if you'd like. But thank you for the submission, Adam. Appreciate it. Really cool photo here. Basically a nice mountain moody scene here on a cloudy day, winter scene up here at Convict Lake in Mammoth Lakes, California, or near Mammoth Lakes, California. And I'm gonna take us through Lightroom and see how we can adjust this photo to maybe make it look a little bit more moody, possibly bring out some more contrast in it. It looks a little flat, a little overexposed, as you can see up here in the histogram. And actually, I think that overall it's actually a pretty good exposure. I think possibly could have been exposed a little bit darker just to ensure that we didn't blow out any of the highlights, but overall it's going to be a very clean exposure here to work with, and should be fun to play with. Taken on, I assume, it's on a Sony. I took it on a 16-35, and I assume that it's probably one of the newer models. All right, let's go to full screen so that you can get a little bit better picture of what we're seeing here, and then we'll get down to the edit. So first and foremost, in all of my Lightroom edits, when I start out, I go in and I click on the Remove Chromatic Aberration and Enable Profile Corrections. I do that to make sure that any sort of distortion created by the lens that was used is fixed, and it also helps me to make sure that I'm fixing any sort of vignetting that was happening in the corners. So if I click this on and off, you'll see that the corners are getting brightened a little bit, and the exposure got brightened a little bit overall, and that's okay. Actually, the corners maybe got brightened. Nah, let's leave it as it is, and then we'll play with it a little bit after that. Looks pretty good here. As you can see, when you click Profile Corrections, it grabs the lens that was used as long as you have a RAW file, and the lens is recognized by one of the profiles here in Lightroom. And that's pretty common. I mean, most major cameras are available here. If you use something that's ancient, then you might have an issue. Now, the other thing that I work on is detail before I start working on the RAW. And I think we're going to zoom in here to an area, something in this area where the photo is sharp. And I assume that this was his area of focus, something in here. That's where I would have focused. It looks like the mountains are just slightly out of focus, and he's at f10, so I'm guessing that he focused somewhere down in here. This looks like a nice area to sharpen. We have some nice edges here that we can look at. I'm going to turn the sharpening and the noise reduction all the way off, and actually before we sharpen, let's go in and reduce the noise and see if there is any noise. And I think there really shouldn't be any because this exposure was well exposed, but I think there's a little bit here, some magentas and some teals here in the shadowed areas. So we'll just go in and bring our color noise up until those disappear, and then I won't move it any further. Something around 10 is usually my go-to number. As far as sharpening goes, I am going to take a look back at the edges here of some of the ice forming up here. And by the way, this is really cool. These are sheets of ice that were on the lake, and then a strong wind came in and pushed the ice up against each other here at the back end of the lake. It gets really windy at this lake usually. So pretty cool thing. Really cool that he caught this. So these are going to help us to sharpen the image. This is a nice area right here where we have some nice edges to look at. I'm going to start with sharpening. I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Option button if you're on a Mac, and go ahead and slide that to the right. Now we hold down that button because it gives us, as you see, a black and white view of the photo, and this will help us to see the sharpening better. And generally I do a sharpening between 35 to 40, maybe a little bit over more if I wanted to sharpen it a little bit. So 43 looks good there. Now radius, I like to turn my radius down because radius is what creates edging on the side of our image here. So we are going to slide this down. And lately I've been sliding it all the way down to 0.5, but this image seems like it is a little bit soft, so I'm just going to pull it back up to maybe 0.6 or 0.7, something like that. Keep the edge where it is. Now detail you want to be careful. As I pull up the detail, you can see that I'm pulling out a lot of detail on the ice, but I'm also creating a lot of noise. So you want to be careful on how much detail you use. I think anything around 50 is safe. I think 30, the default of 25 to 50 is probably a good range. I wouldn't go much higher than 50. Maybe a little bit higher, but not much. Now, masking is super important. We don't want to sharpen the reflection here as much. Well, not the reflection, but the clouds certainly we don't want to sharpen. We don't want to sharpen the darker areas of the photo because those don't need to be sharpened. So our masking is going to be super important. As we hold down that Alt or Option button, we can slide back and really only sharpen what we need to. Maybe a little bit of the sky here, somewhere in the, well, maybe that range. So now we're sharpening a lot of the foreground here. But not a lot of the sky, obviously, with that mask. If you're not familiar, the mask where it's white is where it is more sharp, or the sharpening is being applied, and where it's black, no sharpening is being applied. Now, luminous noise reduction, I don't think this photo really has any, and traditionally I look up in the clouds, but you can kind of look maybe in this area here to see if there's any luminance noise, and there's a little bit, but I really wouldn't be too concerned about it. As we turn it on and off, we've actually maybe created a little bit more noise, but we definitely sharpened the image quite a bit. Maybe turn that detail down just a hair. I don't like using a lot of detail. And we could also mask a little bit further there. And then maybe turn the luminance noise just up a tick or two. I don't like using a lot of luminance noise, but this image is pretty clean, so I think we can get away with smoothing it out just a little bit. So, overall, when I am sharpening and noise reducing here in the detail panel, I'm not trying to overdo my image or trying to bring out detail or trying to damage the image by reducing or adding noise reduction. I would let you know that anytime that you do any sort of noise reduction, you're going to be removing detail from the photo, so you want to be careful there. So after that, we can get back up into the basic panel and start making some adjustments. My first adjustment is to white balance, and I get my white balance by turning up my vibrance and saturation, and then I'm going to find a happy medium here where the image looks more correct. And I think the image was overall a little bit warm there. Even though it was taken in the middle of the day, we might just cool it down just a little bit here. Where the snow is looking white. We have some warmth up in the rocks, which is natural, and then in the trees here, but the ice is cool here, and that looks pretty good. Now we are have a little bit of green here. We might be able to add just a little bit of magenta to maybe minimize that green and flatten out that color just a little bit more. And we're getting too much magenta in the mountain now. We're going to go back, and this right there looks good. So just a hint of add. Now, as we go back and turn it off, if your white balance is correct, you'll see that your image looks kind of black and white, which mine does now, and then you know it's correct. Continuing on, I think that the image, again, was overexposed. We can see that in the histogram. So I'm going to back off the exposure here, maybe into this range here. And then I'll pull up my whites from there to bring some brightness back in the image, and maybe bring my whites till about there. Might reduce my... Actually, we could maybe push the highlights a little bit and pull down the blacks maybe, and add some black points to kind of contrast this image a little bit. It's a little flat. I'm gonna just get to where I have one black point or so, and that looks pretty good right in there. I think I'm satisfied. So now we have to play and get the image where we're overall happy. I'm not... With these adjustments that I'm making here, and by the way, you'll see that I skipped over contrast because I'm contrasting the image using these sliders. I'm not trying to fix every single piece of the image using these sliders. I'm just trying to get the overall picture to where I want it, and then we'll make some adjustments with some tools in a moment. So shadow wise, this is what shadows is doing. I think we're going to boost up the shadows here actually a little bit. Bring back some detail in these rocks. And then we can bring our black point down just a little bit. There we go. Now let's see a before and after. To see a before and after of your whole entire edit so far, you can hit the backslash key and you'll see it says before up here, and I'm getting a raw look, and this is what he sent me. And here's our adjustments so far. A little bit darker in tone, and a little bit more mood. So far so good. I think it's getting a little bit too cool. We might just warm it up just a hair here. There. Let's just do a before and after. Yeah, that's good. Now it's nice. So I am pretty happy with what we have so far. Overall, the image looks really good in terms of balance. Let's add some texture to this image. These presence sliders, if you don't know, are contrast sliders. So they add contrast in different ways. Texture is going to try and pull out the texture and find details on things. So I'm going to zoom in to this area here. And I'm going to just add in some texture and watch the areas, something like this as I add it in. Pull that up a little bit. I don't use these sliders very much, no more than 30, and usually the like around 10 is more likely it. Now, clarity is going to create some pop in the image, and clarity is what I call like mid-tone contrast. It's going to try and contrast and pull and separate areas of contrast. But this image, we have a lot of contrast, as you can see here. And I think if we reduce the clarity a little bit and soften the image just a hair, it'll help pull back a little bit of detail and loosen the contrast in the mountain up here, which will help us to make a little bit more detail and viewability up here. As far as dehaze goes, dehaze is a contrast that tries to cut through hazy light. It'll either add haze or reduce haze, but as you reduce haze, it makes the image cooler or adds blue. As you add haze and make the image hazier, it's going to add warmth. This particular image could almost do with a little bit of warmth maybe, but in a hazy sort of way, to just maybe add that snowy type of haze feel to it, of a snowy day. Before and after, I'm going to add a little bit. And it's really just helping our blacks and our shadows a little bit with this adjustment, I think. So let's do a before and after and see how our adjustments are so far. Good. Before and after, before and after. Okay, awesome. I think we can add a little bit of vibrance to the image, or maybe just add some saturation in general, and not the vibrance. So let's just boost the saturation a little bit. Now vibrance is a different type of saturation. It's going to try and equalize the colors in the image. It's going to try and basically raise the muted colors. So for example, blues are typically, there's not a lot of blue in this, but it's trying to raise the blue. It's trying to raise the teal here with the vibrance. I don't think I'm going to add that much vibrance. I'm going to add a little bit just to kind of bring some colors back. And then we might just add some saturation to bring back some of the color in some of these dead tree or leafless trees, I should say, and bushes here on the lake shore. Maybe not that much saturation, maybe something there. And then we'll go work it up in our color slider. Now, usually I would skip over the tone curve here, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Because I think that you could make some good adjustments by adjusting the highlights, darks, and shadows, but by making adjustments in here to the range that each of these areas is affecting. For example, this is darks, this is lights, this is highlights, and this is shadows. So we can control what pixels, though, each slider is affecting. So for example, if we wanted to work on shadows here, we could turn shadows all the way up, and we can then decide how much of shadows or how much of the darks does shadows affect. And you can see how as I change this, you are seeing the change in tonal range that the adjustment is affecting. So maybe we just want to affect the darkest blacks and just raise those up just a tad here. Now, our darks in turn, affects this range. And we'll darken it down, and then let's change this slider so that our darks begins to touch the clouds a little bit. No. Yeah, let's let it touch the clouds a little bit. And then maybe we can raise this back up. No, let's take that back. I'm not going to change it. I'm messing with things a little bit. Let's try that. And then let's turn our darks back down there. And then just seep in a little bit of contrast here. So now you can control how your contrast is being applied by adjusting this in terms of tonality in the image. So you can control the spectrum that each thing is representing. Now lights, for example, we could turn lights down and make highlights be a certain range if we wanted to. I don't know if I can creep out some of the higher areas. Not really. So it's tough to, there's not a lot of tonal separation in the image up in this area. So I think overall we're a little hot in the whites. So I am going to bring the lights down just a hair. There. So now you can see these adjustments before and after, and really just we had reduced the exposure even more, but we were able to control that reduction by really controlling the shadows and darks, and we basically have a mid-tone adjustment here with our lights and darks. So now we're controlling the mid-tones, but we're also leaving the shadowed areas as they were. So it's almost like we are selecting certain tonal ranges to work with here. So the next thing that I would say is that in general, I don't use the tone curve very much because I feel like most of my adjustments are able to be made here in this area. Now an image here actually worked out to use the tone curve in the manner that I did to kind of help separate some of the textures and depth and tone in the rock here. So take that to heart, I suppose. But I would say in general, I don't use the tone curve very much. And certainly I never use it in a point fashion. So I never use it like this because it's so impossible to control the tone curve here with points. It just gets very complex very fast. So unless you know what you're doing, I don't recommend doing it. And then in turn, I don't really adjust colors with the tone curve. So you can do some coloring effects here with the tone curve, but I would never do that. Let's go ahead and go back to linear. And then let's go back to what we had here in this adjustment. So you can see my curve is a weird S-curve. It's actually a reverse S-curve. I removed some contrast from this image that I created that I didn't quite like here in the basic panel. So kind of nice. Now let's get on to color. I typically use my color panel instead of HSL, but in a color mode like this. And then I also make sure that I have all so I can just work color by color. I will say that I never touch the luminance slider here, but I do use the saturation slider to find out where a color is in the image. For example, if I turn red all the way up here, I can see that there's some red happening right up here in the mountain in some of the rocks. I don't think I necessarily want to turn up the red in this image. If you had a nice sunset, you might turn up red, but not for this one. In fact, I might just turn the red down a little bit. I think most of the foreground color is going to come from the orange spectrum, and sure enough it does. The orange is what's going to be the color of these rocks, as they're brownish orange. Now we might actually boost that color to kind of bring that out a little bit. Let's do it kind of slowly. Start at 0. And just add a little bit of richness there. Now we should also see some yellow in the foreground too. Just a little bit, I guess. Just a little bit here. Not a lot. I think that we don't really need to boost up the yellow very much. We'll just kind of actually maybe even bring that down just a hair. It seems like that's a funky color back there. So maybe a little bit more orange just to make it a little bit more color pop here. That's good. We don't want to overdo it. We don't want to oversaturate this image, but we do want to bring some color back to let people know this is a color image. Of course, we could always just make this a black and white image and just work it from there. Kind of a different edit, though, entirely from color, in my opinion. All right, so we're working our way down. We can work our way through green, and there shouldn't be any green in the image. This down here could raise a little bit of green, and it does. I think that there is some green in there. Oh yeah, It's definitely green. So we have to decide, how much green do we want under that weird blue color of the thin ice out here? I think that I don't really like it to be very strong, something in that range. And then teal should be in this range too, and I think we can turn down the teal color as well. Or in fact, you could even, if you really wanted to, maybe slide this towards the blue spectrum a little bit and then reduce back down to kind of match what we have over here. We can in turn slide this a little bit towards green or the teal, both colors. So we're kind of smoothing out the color difference back in there, and we could even just reduce the teal some more. Now there should be some blue in the image and the sky, I would think. No, mostly down here in the foreground. We don't necessarily need that blue to be strong or there at all. Traditionally, most of my images, I find that I'm raising up warmer tones and cooling down cooler tones, depending on the edit I'm going for. But this is an image where we definitely need to do that. Oops, sorry for that incorrect click there. So purple, a little bit in the sky. That's shouldn't really be there, so we'll kind of brush that down. Turn that down a little bit. And same thing with magentas. If there are any magentas out there, it's probably just noise, so don't need that. I warmed the image up, and now I'm thinking that if we wanted to create a little bit darker mood, we might cool down the temperature here. And I think now that I'm getting into this edit, I feel like I want to take it in a little bit more of a darker mood. So let's just cool it down ever so slightly here. Something like that. Now we have to watch our blues, because our blues are going to be coming in the foreground a little bit more. So let's go in and reduce that color a little bit. There we go. Yeah, now it's not quite so warm. Looking a little bit more cooler and moody. A little bit more neutral too. I think it was just a little warm before. All right, looking good. So split toning is not something I use, but for this edit, if we wanted to add something, we wouldn't necessarily be adding warmth to this image, but maybe a little bit of coolness. You get really weird, I think, and you can get creative, but I mean, I've seen people do cool edits with, say, a blue tone, and maybe, you know, adding this in at a lower degree to just kind of add some coolness to the shadows. Maybe bring that back. I liked it where it was. That's good. Now, the problem is that if we wanted to add something to the highlights here, it's going to be very strong in all the area. But maybe we could add the similar blue tone, a little bit lighter, but do it really soft. Yeah, so kind of forces the shadows to be a little bit cooler here. Let's turn this all the way up and this all the way up, and you can kind of see what's going on. So maybe I should change colors here so you can see the difference. So now most of my highlight color is coming through. We're now more of the shadows coming through and the highlight colors pushed. The balance here is changing the tone of the colors and what tones they are adjusting, how much highlight's being adjusted, and how much shadow, and how much shadow, and how much highlight. So you can control that effect. I think if we went back a few steps here to where I was, I'm adding a cooling effect, but same color almost, but a stronger effect in the shadows than in the highlights. And in fact, what we could do with the highlights, instead of adding the blue, we could add a little bit of warmth. So maybe we add just a little bit of a warmish yellow here, something that's maybe a little bit too orange. Something like that, but at a low degree. There. So I mostly use split toning to help create more contrast in the image. So we're warming up the highlights and cooling down the shadows a little bit, which helps to kind of separate the image a little bit. But you want to be careful. You don't want this coloring effect to get to where you're doing something weird like this and creating, you know, like a two-tone image. You want to be very light with these effects. I usually skip over split tone as well. So we're done there. I want to start adding some adjustment tools, and hopefully this edit won't go on too much longer. I wanted to keep these videos kind of short, but maybe you'll enjoy the length and the detail that's in it. I think in the future these videos might be a little bit shorter. So I'm going to darken down the sky here to force the eye into the middle of the frame. And what I'm going to do is just pull down the exposure here so that we have a look at what we see, and I kind of like that. That's decent. We might do something more like this. Now I don't like what it's doing to the mountain, so what we're going to do is go ahead and change the luminosity range, and we're going to go ahead and take out those mountains from the luminosity range. If you're not familiar with this, then you should look into it and start using it more to control your range of adjustments. Actually, we might I closed that, but let's keep it open for a moment. I want to take a look at what the adjustment's doing here. And I think I accidentally created 2 adjustments, so let's turn that off. There we go. So we have our adjustment now is not touching much to the mountain. That looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit further out. There we go. Turn the luminance mask off, and now I can play with my adjustment a little bit. I think instead of doing the exposure, I might just do the shadows. Well, we're going to bring the shadows down, and maybe bring the black point down, then maybe bring the exposure down a hair. And actually, maybe we rotate this just a little bit. I feel like this top corner is a little bit bright in this area, so we'll see what we're going to do about that. And that actually might be fixed with something else. With the lens profile correction, possibly. I think the corners, I was going to do that earlier. I think the corners are just a little bit too bright, maybe. We have to reduce those a hair. So let's see what this adjustment looks like. I wanted to darken down the sky, but I don't. That looks pretty good, actually. And maybe it's a little strong, and we can actually possibly, I think there's a little bit of a magenta tint in the sky, so I'm going to add a little bit of green up there. And maybe a little bit of blue just to kind of add some mood. Yeah, that looks, well, that's too far. Hold on, that's too much. I think this range there. So let's see the before and the after. Yeah, I like that much better. Getting some more mood out of this photo now. All right. Now I think we could darken down. It seems like it's a little bit bright in the corners. Let's go back and take a second look at our profile correction here and mess with the vignetting. All right, so that darkens down our corners for us. I think we want to go maybe something like there. And I back down my vignetting sometimes on my camera profile. I don't know if you guys do that or not. But sometimes I do. That looks pretty good. And we'll probably add a vignette at the end, so I think we can move on. Let's make some more adjustments. All right, so if we wanted to kind of focus the eye in the middle of the frame as we're doing here by darkening down the sky, and actually maybe we bring this up just a little bit. There we go. So now we are kind of focusing the eye kind of in the middle here. We also want to darken down the bottom of the frame, and as I was getting to, let's create a new adjustment here, and let's pull up from the bottom something like this. And I feel like this area right here is darker than this area already, so I know this is kind of backwards and it looks good already, but I want to try and even out the exposure in the foreground, and then we'll add vignette later to lead the eye forward, if that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, a little backwards. Normally I wouldn't do this, but we're going to add exposure to the foreground and brighten it up a little bit. I'll bring this down about there. And it looks like this adjustment needs to go Looks like somewhere in there. Maybe something like that. Now I'm going to start at 0 and I'm going to slowly trickle in this effect. In fact, I want to go really slow. Something like that. Even that little minute, like just a tenth of an exposure. And it seems like I've evened things out a little bit here. Okay, now also what we can do with our foreground with some adjustment tools is with another graduated filter. Let's pull some more detail out of this foreground using some adjustment tools. So I'm going to, let's just see where this area, where we're affecting by downing the exposure here. I'm just going to push this up, something like that. That looks good. Now, I don't want to lower the exposure here necessarily, but I do possibly want to add a little bit more texture. Bring out some detail here. No, maybe not texture, maybe just a little bit of clarity. Maybe help the contrast in that area. We could also maybe bring the exposure down just a little bit to help the eye go towards the mountains here. We could also mess with some of the things in here. We could maybe raise the highlights a little bit. No, we want to move the whites, I believe. Let's just raise the whites a little bit. And maybe bring down the blacks a little bit. Bring down our shadows a little bit. And so what we're doing is actually helping to create some contrast between the tonal range in here. Okay, before and after. So now you can see that we're starting to get from a flat look here, we're getting a lot more tonal range in the shadowed and the ripples here of the ice and the textures, and it's helping to create more depth in the frame. So now we're getting the more texture and the more contrast you can create. Then the better off you're going to be. Double checking our live stream here. If you are live with me, say something in the chat. Say hello. Yeah, overall, looks like it's streaming a little bit better this time. Sorry for the brief breaks here if you're listening to the live recording or the recording of the live stream. Giving a lot of testing to the live stream to see what bit rates work best for me, so bear with. Okay, let's continue on and see if we can finish off this video before things get a little bit too dragged on here and you get a full tutorial. But I'm enjoying editing this and playing a little bit and trying to get the most out of it, so it's kind of fun. Now we could maybe add a little bit of cool temperature down here too. Not much, just a little bit to cool down the ice, just ever so slightly. And I was talking about before, we're basically trying to add depth and texture here. Okay, that looks good. Now, we can also go in and maybe add a little bit of a vignette now. Let's go ahead and make a big circle here with our radial filter tool. I'm going to go ahead and place it in the center of the frame here, something like such. And just start with something, an exposure like so, and we'll go start playing with things. So definitely I like feathering in the radial filter at 100% for my vignettes. And then maybe we can mess with the luminosity mask here, the luminance mask, and maybe take out the mountains from this adjustment so that those aren't getting affected here, and more just a lighter adjustment down here and in the sky. That might be a little bit too much. I'm going to pull it back out a little bit. You could also pull the highlights out a little bit here. There. Something like that. And let's see how the adjustment works with that sort of tonal range. I like choosing different tonal ranges for the adjustment, as you can see what it's doing here. It's a weird kind of, going to be a weird adjustment here possibly. Yeah, I don't like it. Let's go ahead and reverse that. We have to do the highlights for sure. So a smaller adjustment for this vignette. We don't want to do, and maybe we get a little bit more of the mountains here, but not the darkest blacks. Now, we don't want to go overboard with this vignette, ever. Looks good. So I'm just going to go back to 0, and I'm just going to tap down here. Let's go back down and just have it full. Full in terms of range. I'm actually going to zoom out a little bit for this. I wish I could. I like looking at, when I'm doing vignettes, I like looking at the picture a little bit smaller. I think that's pretty good there. Let's do a before and after so far with the edit and see. Let my eyes adjust here. So started out with this image here, and now we are here. And we could maybe go back and, is this my darkening? Yeah, that is my darkening one. So now I might go back on this darkening mask here, or the adjustment that I raise the exposure, and I might just do one tap there. Yeah, looking good. Now the night, I think we got a little bit too blue up here, so I'm going back and I'm readjusting this now that my eyes are starting to adjust. And we'll just add a slight hint, something like that. Okay, let's look again at our vignette. A little bit darker. I'm just watching the screen here. Sorry if I'm getting a little quiet. Looks good. Okay, so now we're starting to get that little bit of kind of light flowing the eye towards the middle of the frame here, towards the interest, which is kind of here and here. This is kind of secondary foreground, and this is really sky the interest area that's not very interesting, right? All right, so what we're going to do is maybe try to add a little bit of brightness in the center of the frame, doing a reverse vignette. So we're going to keep that one dark. We'll do another one, another circle here in the top, but maybe like there. And this one, I'm definitely just wanting to hit the highlights with it. So I'm going to take out the darks, and actually we're going to invert this mask like such. So I want to take out the darks, and actually, let's see. I'm going to make this a little bit less oval, something like that. And I think I can separate. Yeah, let's do something like this. I think that the light, I don't know, I guess the light is kind of coming at the horizon mostly. So maybe something a little less deeper in this range there. So what I really want to try to do is just kind of make some light come over the mountains here a little bit. Less on the snow. There we go. And maybe we want it to go like this. There we go. That would be a little bit more natural if the light was coming from here, shadowed here, a little bit brighter in this area. And then I guess what I was really trying to do is get a little bit of brightness here on the ice. If that makes any sense. And I think we need to make this just a little bit bigger. Okay. Turn off that range mask, and let's see how we can make an adjustment here. Maybe make this area pop. I'm going to pull up the whites just a little bit. See what the highlights are doing. Maybe pull up the highlights a hair. Maybe we back off the whites just a little bit here, since we're pulling up the highlights to kind of pull up some of that brightness. That looks pretty good. I wonder if we rotate this just a hair. Yeah. So now we're kind of creating some shadow over here and some interest of light over here in these areas to kind of force the eye forward again. And that's really my goal here, is just to kind of lead the eye in a flat. We're recreating some sort of light that we didn't have because this was a flat kind of area, or a flat exposure, I guess, flat lighting, I guess you would say. Now this effect looks a little strong, so what I'm going to do is just back everything down just a little bit, and then we can turn it on and off. And I think the vignette is a little strong now because we've increased the light. So there's our vignette. Maybe we make our vignette a little bit bigger to lessen the effect, and then we will pull it back off. Maybe just 0.2. There we go. So now you can really see we've almost kind of created a horizon glow, which is focusing the eye into a specific part of the image. And let's zoom out and look at the image in a way. I like looking at it a little bit more zoomed out to see what would it look like if it was on the wall. And I think about that a lot. What would the whole image look like? Looks pretty good. I think this is the most I could probably do with this image. I suppose we could do some crazy stuff in terms of warping and get into Photoshop and do some different things to it to maximize it. But overall in Lightroom, I think that we did a pretty good job. Let's take a look at the before here. So here we are with the raw file and the finished product. Pretty good. Well, guys, that's going to conclude this video. If you enjoyed the video and would like to see some more, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, or follow me on Instagram if you're watching this on IGTV. I'll be doing some more of these edits, maybe not live. I was really doing this live as a test, but in the future these will probably be a little shorter and a little bit faster in general, but I thought I'd do a little bit of a long one here for your enjoyment, just so I could do a little bit of a long live stream and test it out. If you want to submit your RAWs, you can do that. Check the link in the description of the video, or you can go to www.chrisewencrosby.com/raw, and you can learn about how you can make a submission and get your RAW files to me for a future edit here on one of my channels. So thank you guys for joining me. Hopefully you enjoyed the edit. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something, and maybe you can apply some of the techniques that you saw here to some of your videos, and in turn increase your editing skills. Until next time, this is Chris Ewen Crosby, and thanks for joining me, and hopefully we'll see you again real soon.